transcripts are horrific, and the kids, very young children, being interviewed for hours upon hours and just told, just tell us what happened, and then you can go.
They're still active. They're still practicing. Many of them were never even disciplined in any way. This seems really painful. I don't know if I should continue. And the investigator would say, please continue. And they would keep going.
It was Blood Dutch for cheers.
Hello everyone, welcome to Beyond Binary Thinking, a podcast where we try to discuss ourselves out of the simplistic and tribalistic binary debates, whilst remaining open to challenges and corrections as we meet differing opinions. From Cadiz, I'm Finn.
From Plymouth, I'm Chris.
And from Boston, I'm Evan.
Thanks, Evan. So today, joined by Evan Anderson, head of the Grey Faction. You've done some inspiring work taking on pseudoscience and conspiracy therapists in the mental health industry. Thanks so much for joining us.
Can you introduce yourself, Evan, and the work of the Grey Faction? Because I'm sure people are maybe scratching their heads thinking, what's the Grey Faction?
So I'm Evan. I'm the director of Grey Faction. Campaign of the Satanic Temple. If you're familiar with the Satanic Temple, you'll know we're kind of the new satanic religion on the block. So Grey Faction is a campaign that focuses on trying to end the Satanic Panic. So when we say Satanic Panic, we're typically referring to a period during the 80s and 90s when there was kind of bizarre conspiracy theories around, satanic cults abducting and abusing people and doing it so severely that people forget what happened to them. And then only with the help of a therapist could they then recover memories of what happened.
And that continues to this day. There's still
Absolutely.
Some kind of moral panic, right? Going
Absolutely. It never really went away. It kind of just went underground. So a lot of the same, psychiatrists, psychologists, and other mental health professionals that were really at the core of the Satanic Panic as far as laying down the groundwork in a professional sense in the mental health field. They're still active. They're still practicing. Many of them were never even disciplined in any way. So what Grey Faction tries to do is to bring some accountability for these people who are still around and still propagating these dangerous and harmful conspiracy theories and pseudoscience.
Yeah, thanks for that. Good introduction. It came up when we were talking to your colleagues Shalise Blythe and Kim on our episode for the Satanic Temple. One of the things they mentioned was the McMartin Daycare Center case, which I think...
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, just refresh us on that specific case, if you could, please.
Yes, that was a case in California where a mother noticed some scarring on her child and suspected abuse. Unfortunately, this woman was suffering from severe mental illness at the time. What ended up happening was all of these accusations started being thrown around. So there was, of course, the daycare staff, the staff at the McMartin preschool who were accused. And it turns out the evidence for that child having been abused in the first place, I believe, was disputed. But in any case, it is a very typical example of the Satanic Panic. And this is really what this case really is considered the one that started it all. It starts with one accusation, even if it's legitimate. Sometimes there could be real abuse, but then it just really spirals out of control. Parents who began panicking, and a lot of other parents started to suspect their children were abused, started asking them questions, and not necessarily in any kind of intentional way implanting the idea that they were abused. And oftentimes that took the form of not accepting no for an answer. Conveying to the child that what they wanted to hear was that they were abused.
And then I imagine it snowballed to some
Absolutely, it snowballed. They started to suspect satanic cult involvement. Yeah, so that's a very typical case where it kind of starts with one accusation, and the accusation may be perfectly legitimate. There may have been real abuse, but then it just it snowballs, and then all of a sudden you're looking for these tunnels beneath the preschool where, children were supposedly taken, and ritually abused and then returned, as if nothing ever happened.
Yeah, and you had just this unholy triumvirate of, concerned, well-meaning parents obviously wanting to look into it, a police force that was kind of pushing these kids. As you some of the transcripts are horrific, and the kids, very young children, being interviewed for hours upon hours and just told, just tell us what happened and then you can go. And so the kids are like, okay, I was abused. Yes, okay, now you can have some candy and fine, you can go home and we'll come back tomorrow. And then that combined with, this cottage industry, right, of psychologists who are paid to consult for the criminal justice system, right? So they're advising police, oh yeah, indeed, it is possible that they may have repressed some of these memories. And then these people are also prepared to speak in court and testify that, oh yeah, it's possible that they might have not remembered it before, but then the suppressed memories got re-triggered finally. And then they're also obviously counselling these kids. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Could we go into Elizabeth Loftus and all of her amazing research?
She's among the first to kind of really do the research that helped to combat the Satanic Panic. And what her research proved is that you can implant false memories in people. She's done tons of work in this area. So she's most well known for the Lost in the Mall study. This was a study, I think it was a pretty small study in terms of sample size. I don't think there were a huge number of participants in this, but that's what it was like back then.
The golden age of psychology.
Yeah,
you could get away with anything.
When no one really questioned your findings. But this sort of thing has been replicated. Basically, they had participants come in and would ask them about things that didn't happen. So they actually managed to implant the idea that they were lost in a mall as a child. And the first time they would suggest this to the participants, they would kind of say, no, I don't remember that. But a certain number of them came to actually believe that they were lost in a mall as a child. And so that really, I think that experiment is so well known because it provided really clear evidence that you can, suggest to somebody that something happened when it never really did.
Moreover, though, it raises an interesting point philosophically about, is that person lying? Because you would sort of say, well, no, they're not, because they really think it happened, but they're not telling the truth, right? So it creates this kind of...
Yeah, it's really difficult, though, from a criminal justice point of view, because, as we say, like a well-meaning police detective trying to get to the heart of it, if you push people and the police know details, they're using that information and pushing it onto a witness. And then later on, that person might then recall it. And so it's evidence that they saw it. It matches up with the suspect the police have in their mind. Mm-hmm. You can really pollute someone's evidence given in a court case. And so Loftus did an amazing thing, not only proving it with the research, but then fighting, sometimes literally, going up in court and testifying really, really strongly against these people, which were... And again, there's these consultants that earn a living saying things like flashbulb memory, like memory is very strong and you should believe the witnesses. And her being able to show that actually, one memory, one witness, it's just too shaky a thing to necessarily convict someone of if there isn't much more detailed evidence.
Absolutely, yeah. Eyewitness evidence is something that the courts and juries take very seriously. And I think that's something that needs to be reconsidered.
How could that be reconsidered? Like, what would the suggestion be? Like, to change the strength of the evidence and still consider it? Or
yeah, I think it would just be, acknowledging that eyewitness evidence is not as strong as people often think it is. That people can have these false memories.
And the danger is, Finn, there's like I say, I don't know if you've ever heard the term flashbulb memory, but there's this idea in lay people's understanding of psychology that people remember trauma vividly and that their memory is very good and very precise, right? Sort of like the where were you when you heard JFK was killed.
When
was the old
9/11
thought
happened,
experiment, and everyone was like, "Oh yeah, I can remember it exactly." And people think their memories are really good for traumatic things, and there's some studies that were able to show that. However, people like Loftus have shown the opposite is in fact the case. And although people might be very confident they remember things very well, that isn't always true.
So confidence doesn't correlate to the veracity of the memory.
It probably plays a factor. If someone says it's shaky, then you could believe that. But yeah, the problem is, as I alluded to earlier, that there were these actual paid consultants who were going into court cases and showing this psychology evidence that said, "Oh, memory is actually rock solid. Especially if someone's stressed or shot of adrenaline, they'll remember things very clearly and in detail, and so we should trust them." As you're saying, it's not cut and dry, but especially where you find examples of the police coaching eyewitnesses, right, and examples of that in transcripts. It's good to be aware of the dangers and the limitations of eyewitness memory.
Is there I have this like kind of layman understanding of memory and psychology, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably am. The idea is that like the more you access a memory, you're not actually accessing the original memory, but you're accessing like the last time you remembered it. Is that just nonsense, or is that? And so then over time, the idea is that it can change. The memory can.
Yeah, it's a reconstruction. Each time you remember it, you can change it each and every time. It's sort of like if you open a file on your computer, you can't really open it read only. It's always read and write, and there's probably always some changes made to make it more cut and dry than it actually was. Maybe you forget some of the nuance, some of the details. Probably, I think, particularly things that you weren't focused on at the time. The more fuzzy details, those might either go away completely, or they might be solidified even more in a way that definitely distorts what originally happened.
Very interesting. So that's sort of my introduction to the Satanic Panic, the McMartin Daycare Centre, Loftus and her research. Do you want to take us forward, like towards more modern times, and sort of incorporating that into what you guys are working on at the moment?
Sure. I'm glad you're here to talk about the 80s and 90s, because a lot of those details I don't know that much about, to be perfectly honest. My focus is really on what's happening today. What kind of malpractice are we seeing? What kind of techniques are being used, and who are the people? So I'll start with the relevant organizations. So the big one is the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. This is a mental health organization. They were founded, I believe, in 1984, and originally named the International Society for the Study of Multiple Personality and Dissociation. And I think they changed their name once or twice more before becoming what it is today, the ISSTD. And really, the co-founders of the ISSTD are really some of the major players in the Satanic Panic, and a lot of them are still around. So, for example, Bennett Braun is one of the co-founders. He is currently facing his 12th lawsuit, I believe. He was practicing in Chicago, where he had, I believe, a dissociative disorders unit at Rush Presbyterian Hospital. He claimed to be, an expert on ritual abuse, that he had a ton of patients that, suffered at the hands of these satanic cults. He had one patient in particular, Patricia Burgess, who there's a great Chicago Magazine article about her and what she went through. She went into therapy with Bennett Braun and ended up with all these really bizarre and disturbing memories of her parents being part of a satanic cult, of this massive basically child abuse ring going on, involving not just her family but lots of community members. And it appears Bennett Braun actually believed what was going on. So there's several things that happened, but one in particular that stands out as the most egregious. He was convinced that her father was feeding her human meat in the form of like meatloaf, and so he had her take a sample of meatloaf and bring it in to him, and then he sent it out for testing to see what was in it. Spoiler alert, there was no human meat in it. It was just beef or whatever. So that's one example of a co-founder. There are others. Another that practiced with Bennett Braun was Roberta Sachs. Both of them have been sued simultaneously in multiple lawsuits, I believe.
So what's their motivation to do this? Do you think they're just generally like misguided and, you know, not very, or are they, is there some other like nefarious intention there?
I tend to think, for the most part, people are misguided. I think a lot of them really think they're doing the right thing. That there is really this scourge of child abuse in the form of ritual abuse that they're fighting against, and they're uncovering it and all of that. But
as I find is often the case with these things, it's like they've fallen for their own propaganda. So there are people that keep going on about Satanism and the evil devils.
Right.
Like all these rock bands are trying to take your children. And that, I think at a certain point, the first people that said it were just quite disingenuous, causing a panic to whip up the troops in their church, right? Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, these are the people that... It's like the flat earthers, you know. I think most people think that the flat earth movement started as a people trolling, just what they could argue with a joke physics paper. And then some of the people in that group were like, yeah, this is right. And you're like, no, you guys, it's too late now, never mind. And now the thing has a life of its own, right?
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, back to the ISSTD. So there were these co-founders. I won't go into the others, but we've written about them, and they've all played various roles in sort of igniting the Satanic Panic back in the 80s and 90s. And then that really...
It was like Reignite, wasn't it? Wasn't it like a Satanic Panic before that as well?
They were there in the 80s, like when it all really really started.
Right.
And they provided the sort of quote scientific, really pseudoscientific basis for it in their discussions of trauma and memory and multiple personality disorder. So they had this idea that this ritual abuse is stored in various personality states, and you have to access these personalities through hypnosis and other things in order to recover memory, the memory of what happened.
So
of course, memory doesn't work that way.
I've got a master's in psychology, and we studied it in the UK, and it was really interesting how we studied it. It was sort of like when we learned international psychology, we were told that there's just some things that America does different. You know, there's the APA, right? All the psychologists vote in what should be considered a new thing into the DESM, the Diagnostic Manual for Clinical Therapy. And we were told two things. We were told China always votes for this weird condition, which is like the belief that there'll be democracy in China. And the Chinese government keep pushing for it as a madness, because they're like, well, look, that's never going to happen. So clearly these people are delusional. So international psychologists, could we please include this madness in the manual? And the rest of the world's like, I don't think so, no. And then the other one's America, which suffers from a couple of things. One is the American healthcare system being as heavily privatized as it is compared to most developed countries. Some things have to have a classification just so insurance will pay out. So there's certain things sort of like, you know, both your parents die, and in order for insurance to pay out, that'd have to be called, you know, dual parental post-mortem depression. Whereas in the rest of the world, you'd be like, that's not abnormal psychology. Obviously, that would be sad. So there was a bit of that. And then the other thing was this multiple personality thing, which it's sort of hangover of Freudian psychology, I suppose. And the rest of the world, if someone says, I'm actually a second person, most therapists would say, no, you're not, but let's get you some help. Whereas there's a sect in America where they're like, yeah, okay, let me talk to this Billy and let's find out what's going on with him. And not surprisingly, that made that personality stronger. Mm-hmm. That's my take on it, my naive laypersons. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Evan.
Yeah, so we really focus on getting people who need help, the help that they need. So, we don't think so much about, is multiple personality disorder, which is now dissociative identity disorder. We don't think so much about, is it real or is it fake? We think, the DSM operates by, diagnosing people based on this set of symptoms. If people have those symptoms, clearly they need help. If we attach a certain diagnosis to it, that doesn't matter so much. As long as people who need help, who suffer from, symptoms of mental illness, get help and get effective help, not things that, further entrench any delusions or psychotic beliefs they may be suffering from. But that is an interesting idea about the sort of the over excessive diagnosing being a sort of an artifact of a privatized healthcare system. That would make sense to me. But again, if people do suffer from symptoms, we hope that they, get treatment that they need. If that requires some diagnosis to be attached to it, maybe that's not so great for stigma purposes and other things. But as long as they get help.
Yeah, I do think money can muddy the waters. But to be fair, I've actually been reading in research for this episode the counter argument. There are cases where because you have this large national healthcare system, right? Governments are trying to cut costs, and so sometimes they'll pick an option like cognitive behavioral therapy, just because on paper it looks cheaper. Treatment times are shorter, right? And I don't have the expertise or have done the research to get into which therapy it works and which doesn't. But I've read some examples where a cheap version of CBT has been given to people just because it's the most cost-effective on paper method, and patient outcomes have suffered as a result. So it's, I'm not just doing the too easy to do, knock the American healthcare system thing.
Yeah. There could be the whole bureaucratic side as well, right? The whole, people getting lost in a system with, you can imagine that if the doctors don't agree and they get referrals and a bureaucratic nightmare, potentially. Sorry, Evan.
Absolutely. So to go back to the ISSTD, I want to make sure I characterize kind of how they're operating today.
Well, I think this is crucial because as I characterize the conversation from what I learned, there was a problem in the 80s. Loftus came along and fixed it. Phew, okay. Yeah. But it sounds like this is still going on, and the people that did it then weren't punished, and they're still operating today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like there's sort of a resurgence, maybe not so much in the repressed and recovered memory stuff, although that seems to be here too, but there does seem to be a resurgence of the Satanic Panic, especially with QAnon and Pizzagate and all that nonsense. So it is really important to underscore what the sort of mental health fringe that supports this looks like. So in the ISSTD, they have special interest groups. One of them is called the Ritual Abuse, Mind Control, Organized Abuse Special Interest Group. And this is where these licensed professionals really can propagate conspiracy theories of the most bizarre variety. So there's, of course, the satanic ritual abuse conspiracy theory that's sort of been debunked, and I think one effect of that debunking is that it's kind of shifted a little bit. So there's these other kind of sub-narratives and other, related conspiracy theories about mind control. So in the U.S., the CIA had a mind control program called MK Ultra, where they attempted to do these things, like create Manchurian
They give
candidates.
people like loads of acid, loads of LSD,
Yeah,
and stuff like that.
they did all sorts of horrible experiments with the goal of basically turning people into like robots that can do their dirty work for them. And I think there were various other purposes for it. But as far as we know, it ended in sometime in the 70s, I believe. But there are people who believe that it's continued, and some of them are licensed professionals in the ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse special interest group of the ISSTD. And they'll talk about and they'll talk about these things at at the conferences that they have every year. So this is with full approval of the ISSTD as an organization. And on top of that, they'll talk about these things, and they'll these presentations, not only for the people attending it, but also the people presenting it, can get continuing education credits for it. So continuing education, I don't know if this might just be an American thing, but if you're a licensed professional in pretty much any profession, I believe, every couple of years or so, you have to prove that you've completed a certain number of continuing education hours. So the purpose is to show that you're keeping up to date with what's going on in your field. So the idea that you can prove that you're up to date with what's going on in your field by attending these lectures on satanic cults and CIA mind control and the Illuminati is just bizarre, and it's really shameful.
Basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was just like related to people who weren't like necessarily educated in critical thinking or in the academic system, but you're saying that it's the opposite. In fact, like there's people who are not only like who believe it, who are academics and practicing professionally.
Yeah, but then you see licensed professionals doing it and not getting in trouble for it. We've filed many complaints about things these people have said at the conferences. Oftentimes nothing happens.
Do you go there like undercover?
We have had people go in the past undercover and attend some of these presentations.
That must be terrifying. I've seen from your website that you have successfully, you've had a few wins recently, right? Taking some stuff off of the list of continuing education credits.
Yep. So that was survivorship. So this is another organization that's a little bit more open about their conspiracism. The ISSTD is a little bit more secretive. So they put on this facade that's very professional, and some of their presentations probably are fine. Probably do meet the standards. That you would expect for these presentations. I think a lot of times they attract people who are genuinely interested in this topic of trauma and dissociation. But then they have these presentations, you kind of lift the veil a little bit and you see that they completely allow these bizarre conspiracy theories. So survivorship is a little bit more open about it, even posting some of these lectures on YouTube. So this is another conference, and the president of survivorship is a man named Neil Brick, and he's a licensed mental health counselor here in Massachusetts. He claims to believe that he was a brainwashed assassin for the Illuminati, decades ago or whatever. That he killed people, that he raped people apparently. Or he at least heavily implied that he raped people.
You know how he's not telling the truth? Because he's alive and telling it.
Right. You would think...
If the Illuminati really existed, would they just let him get away with
He was
that
a super soldier. That was a term that he used. And if you look at the guy, I mean, he's no one's definition of a super soldier.
But that's the clever thing. It doesn't look like one. No, it's...
Oh, yeah. I guess you're right. So he's the president of survivorship. He presents there, every year, usually multiple times. And he has other people come and present.
What
go ahead.
status is survivorship? Is it like an organization, or like is it just a company? Is it a group? Like what kind of level is it? Is it a bit fringe?
Definitely fringe.
But once you have a conference where people can earn credits that they need in order to retain professional accreditation, there's an easy income for them there, right? Like, and you're fighting their ability to do that.
Absolutely, yeah. So back in late 2018, I had filed a complaint against Alison Miller, a psychologist in Canada, who presented at Survivorship, talking about the strangest stuff, talking about how satanic cults supposedly operate, talking about, these fake surgeries where they implant black hearts in children to convince them that they're evil, that UFO abduction stories are really just elaborate scenarios set up by satanic cults, that satanic cults
that's like a conspiracy within conspiracy. That's
it's just it's
conspiraception.
unbelievable that someone could even come up with this. She was saying that satanic cult members will dress up as God or Satan and rape children in order to convince them that God hates them or whatever. Some of the worst stuff I've ever heard.
Sounds like the Catholic Church, but we'll move on.
Fair enough. So I filed this complaint, quoting at length the things that she was saying, which was, again, on YouTube, on their YouTube channel. And they investigated and kind of approached her about it. Supposedly she was in a semi-retired licensure status, which meant that she wasn't even supposed to be giving these presentations in the first place. So she got in a bit of trouble for that. So instead of facing our complaint, which we were assured was going to be investigated, or she was going to be given some sort of discipline for what she was saying, that she decided to retire. So we considered that a victory. She can no longer call herself a psychologist. She can't present at these conferences, which is great.
But and it's brilliant. But sadly, she spent a lifetime peddling that bullshit.
Right. That's right. She wrote books that people, of course, still read. She had patients who ended up being therapists who then further this narrative. And so that was one victory that we had. And then earlier this year, we had... Oh, actually, I think Alison Miller lost her license last year, so that would have been 2019. But then earlier this year, we filed a complaint with the American Psychological Association about survivorship, quoting some of their lectures, quoting the board's decision regarding Alison Miller, and stuff like that. And there's actually a sort of a middleman between the conference itself and the APA. It's these CE sponsor organizations. So they kind of are responsible for the material that happens, or that is provided at these conferences. So we didn't know who the sponsor was, but we contacted the APA to complain, and they got in touch with the sponsor, and the sponsor decided to drop the conference. And this was about maybe 2 weeks before the conference was going to take place. So they had to just remove the continuing education units altogether, which I suspect is, like you said, Chris, pretty big business. I think that's how they make a lot of their money. Yeah, and it
legitimizes this bullshit shill industry, right?
Absolutely, and it brings people in who, maybe you're a young professional, you need to get some more continuing education credits for your, to renew your license next year, and you see this conference is coming to town, so you're like, yeah, I'll go and see what it's about, and then hopefully, if you have a good head on your shoulders, you kind of laugh at it, but otherwise you can become swayed by it.
Especially if they've got the backing of the APA and right? Like,
exactly.
It legitimizes it. It's dangerous.
Yeah, and there is unfortunately a lot of overlap between the ISSTD and survivorship, especially with the ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse special interest group, and survivorship. There, a lot of the same players are involved in both.
And so, what's their motivation? Is their motivation, you think, to make money? A little bit? And then having two different organizations to try and expand a bit more?
I think the purpose of survivorship is sort of like to be like run by survivors, and survivor therapists. They kind of split their conference into two. So one is like a therapist conference or professionals conference, whatever they call it, and the other is like the survivor conference. So we have people who identify as like survivors of ritual abuse going to the survivorship conference, and I think it's less expensive,
cults, right? Like, no, not forget Satanic Panic, but there have been some very weird cults, and there are some high-profile paedophile cases. I think it's what makes it so hard to grapple with, because at a certain point, they're using these actual cases as a human shield, right? Right? Like, oh, so what's your like? We're trying to help survivors. Are you against the survivors of rape? No, this way of handling it. Fuck yes! Oh my god.
Absolutely, and that's all contained within the name ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse, special interest group. You take the organized abuse cases, which of course there are. There are people like Epstein and others. But then you attach ritual abuse and mind control to it, and it's like if you're denying one, you're denying all of it. So then you're just an apologist for these sex traffickers and pedophiles. It's unfortunate. And it does make it difficult, but I think people are starting to catch on. People are starting to recognize that you don't need these conspiracy theories to fight against human trafficking.
No, and you can care about something, but realize that hysteria is not a productive means of tackling it, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Did you guys see the Wayfair stuff a couple weeks back?
No.
I was so confused by that. My
take on it is that...
Should we explain it first for the listeners?
Sorry. Clue? Before I shit on it.
Can I explain it, and then you correct me if I'm just completely misunderstanding? There was a furniture website. Well, it's like a website where it's a bit like eBay, and they were selling expensive closets, basically, for like $15,000. And then there was basically a conspiracy theory that it came with the tribe.
A bit more detail. With obscure names, right?
Which were the names of the children.
As every modern product does, right? Like some weird obscure name. And then the theory was that why would you buy a cabinet for $20,000 unless it included a child that had been abducted?
So therefore...
Facts.
Right.
My take on all of these conspiracies is, as you mentioned, right? Epstein. There's demonstrable things that already we're not doing anything about. I don't think anyone believes Epstein killed himself, by the way. So there's already demonstrable things that we're not doing anything about. So I don't care if maybe this or maybe that. You're like, look, let's deal with the thing in front of us. And there is an argument that a lot of the QAnon bullshit is, again, people following Russian bots, the sabotage, misinformation, nonsense spreading thing. I think people are perfectly capable of fucking up themselves, but I think that is pouring kerosene on the flames. But yeah, there's an argument that it's a good way for Trump defenders to make noise about you think his friendship with Epstein is bad? Well, look at this even worse case that we have.
Wait till you see how expensive these closets are. Yeah. What's your take on it, Evan?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same thing. It's really unfortunate that it's almost like some of these things that we know are happening aren't quite bad enough. That we have to include things like satanic cults and bizarre rituals and stuff in order for I don't know, people to care about it. I guess it's a bizarre it's a bizarre thought pattern. And people do tend to look for any kind of evidence of, bizarre satanic cult stuff. On Epstein's Island, there's that like temple or whatever that looks like super strange. But people, say, this is evidence that, he's part of a satanic cult and, all that stuff. And it is really unfortunate because there's so much work to be done to fight human trafficking and all that stuff. There are high-profile pedophile rings that need to be broken up and the perpetrators arrested. But then some of the people prefer to focus on, bizarre cult conspiracy stuff. So there's someone named Michael Salter, who's a criminologist in Australia, who's become pretty prominent within the ISSTD. He used to be I believe he was the chair of the Ritual Abuse, Mind Control, Organized Abuse Special Interest Group. I'm pretty sure he's the one responsible for tacking on the organized abuse part of the acronym. He focuses on organized abuse and stuff like this, how technology can facilitate these sorts of horrible crimes against children. But he can't seem to resist adding in the ritual abuse stuff. It's really unfortunate. I mean, he starts, implying that, the McMartin case was just too soon. We weren't ready for the kind of evidence that we were seeing there, that there really were tunnels beneath McMartin, that the Satanic Panic is just kind of
really haven't learned anything.
Yeah, he thinks the Satanic Panic is really just a narrative by perpetrators and their apologists to prevent us from acknowledging how bad child abuse really is. It's really unfortunate that he's clearly capable, I think, of doing good work, but then he starts to talk about this stuff, and it's wasted talent as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Deeply concerning. I was going to ask you, actually, because a lot of this, the basis of it seems to be, the word gets overused, but Christian fundamentalism, right? Like the fear of Satanism as a thing, which ironically you guys have made a real thing since then. So I guess that plays heavily into it, right? The idea that there's good versus evil, heaven versus hell, there's actually a devil, the idea that you guys mock so well. I was wondering if you, in your organization, had any interaction with things such as gay conversion therapy, because that seems an obvious area where Christian organizations would overstep the mark into psychology and therapy.
Yeah, we have not done much on conversion therapy. We think it's repulsive. We think that needs to end. There are organizations that are fighting it, and it could be that those organizations are in a position to be much more effective than we could. With a lot of things, throwing our support as a satanic organization behind it can be harmful. So we have to take those considerations
that I can
into account.
Pick your battles, yeah.
Yeah, but the big thing with fighting conversion therapy is we have so much work to do to try to end the Satanic Panic. We're the only remaining international organization dedicated to this work. To try to focus on other things like conversion therapy at this point, we would just spread ourselves too thin.
No, of course. I was just, wondering if it was something you were following and interested in, rather than... It sounds like you've got more than enough to chew on at the moment. I just, read, and it's shocking to me that gay conversion therapy is still funded by Medicaid. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
In some cases, yep. And
Wow.
The Democrats were trying to push for it to get defunded. There's all these Republicans who are like, "Oh, we should defund Medicaid. It's a waste of taxpayers' dollars." And they're like,
not like that,
Exhibit A, like this one, and they're like, "Nah, not that. That's cool."
That's fine.
Oh yeah, that's just shameful.
Wow. That's mad.
Good God.
Yeah, I was going to mention a point. I don't know if it's that relevant to what you do, but I thought it might be interesting to get your take on it, Evan. There's someone I know who is part of the existential analysis. So it's a society for existential analysts, and it's like psychiatrists, and they're taking like a completely different approach to kind of psychiatry, which is I know it's different from psychology. But do you think that that's an issue in psychology, or maybe in psychiatry specifically, that like is an overconfidence in the way that things are? Because that kind of seems to link to what you were saying about, you mentioned, we were talking about scientific studies, that a lot of the things in psychology are perhaps not as strong as we would like to think. So basically this society is more about The psychologists and psychiatrists in that society, as far as I understand, they're working through with their clients, with their patients, and they're not like in an extreme figure of authority, a position of authority. So what's your take on that? Is there something true there? Is psychology as strong?
Just quickly, what I'll say is there's about 8 strands you need to unpack with that sentence.
It was a really long question. Sorry.
Yeah, no, and then there really are. There's a lot of density in what you just said. So let's start, Evan, I think, with the replication crisis, which you alluded to earlier. Could you explain it to Finn and our listeners?
Sure, I'll do my best.
I'll help.
Yeah, so I think it was Ioannidis, I think that's how you say his name, published a paper that reviewed a lot of psychological findings and basically said most of these are probably actually false.
Did you read the troll study that went hand in hand with that? So as is often the case, right, there was a very good and earnest meta-research which showed the problems with replicating famous old studies that we all know and love, and most average lay people will have heard of. But actually the precursor in one of the initial volleys, as is often the case, was a troll study where he was able to prove ESP, extrasensory perception, as a thing, using the same techniques and methods and maths, importantly, because it gets into p-hacking, right? Using the same maths that other psychology studies had used, was able to prove complete nonsense.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that context. So basically he pointed out that the way we're analyzing results, kind of cherry picking things using multiple hypotheses and not adjusting for that, small sample sizes, and I don't know if he was the one that pointed this out, but the file drawer effect also, where studies will be done and then not published because journals prefer to publish significant findings, but then only the significant findings will make it into the journal. So
you have an avalanche, right? So there's someone that says, I'm interested in something. They're an authority in the field. They've published books. They are financially motivated to do evidence. The people that are drawn to them as their students, who are PhD students, who are running the classes, who are then giving classes to a bunch of undergraduates who are also looking up to these people, and sometimes they're sat in the room while they're doing the experimentation, and there's a strong experimenter effect where if you know what the experimenter wants from the study, you're quite likely as a participant to do it. And most of these experiments are run, you need to get course credit, so you need to join a bunch of studies. That compounded with, as you say, the file drawer effect. So if you find nothing in your study, right? And I even had this with my dissertation for my master's. So I found a positive result, but my sample size was tiny. And we didn't call it p-hacking, we called it p-phishing. I actually said this was 15 years ago, before the replication crisis was a thing. I knew exactly what I was doing. You do mathematical experiment, right? You do this thing. Is this a significant result? If that test fails, there was a chart in our classroom, right? Like, you do that experiment. If that fails, okay, there's a math that works more often. Anyway, you kind of just keep changing the standards and changing the maths you do until eventually you get, boom, positive result, right? Mm-hmm. Cool. Because no one wants to spend 6 months studying something only to find out, I didn't find anything. It was a waste of 6 months. I'm not even saying like it's corrupt or for the money. It's just, it's more interesting to get a positive result after having studied something, especially if you get a good grade. I mean, I got a bad grade because I refused, even though I got a positive result, I said, yeah, but come on, we had a sample size of like 18 people. And I'm about to generalize like the religion of Islam on the basis of 18 people. I'm like, no, sorry, I can't take it. So I got a 2-1 instead of a first. I don't know if that's how Americans grade things. I got a B instead of an A, which incidentally has never come up since. It doesn't matter. But at the time it seemed important. And then that combined with the fact that, like I say, the file drawer effect is really strong. So you don't know how many people have disproven a study as bullshit, but just because you failed to prove something, obviously, how can you publish? And then why would a newspaper report on it? And then why would you share on Facebook, right? And the algorithm favours someone that said, oh, yeah, this guy spent 2 years studying it and failed to find anything of significance. It's just not interesting.
But it is important, though, isn't it?
We don't hear about all the time someone proved a popular theory wrong.
Right. So much of it comes down to those p-values. So we use the cutoff of 0.05 typically, which means that there's, a 5% chance that, 5% or less chance that your finding is just a fluke, that it just happened by chance. So when you compound those, when you're like, okay, this doesn't have a significant p-value, let's analyze it this other way. Let's maybe combine these groups together, split these groups apart. We can then, you do that 20 times or whatever,
and
then there's like 100% chance that you're going to get a positive result or a significant result.
That apply for the master's course are people that are good at doing that. The only people that get PhD funding are the people that are good at that. People, even if it's not intentional, people learn, right? Find a positive result, that's what we're looking for. It becomes this mass delusion. It's really interesting. And it means that so many of our favourite studies from psychology, they're just not trusted anymore. The results...
They've not been replicated, though, like, over time. Like, have some of these studies not been replicated with, like, a bigger sample size?
This is it. They tried to, and often they did. 2014, I don't know the exact year, but often they were. But this is the file drawer effect. If they tried to replicate it and failed to find it, they didn't publish, unless they really thoroughly studied it, in which case they were like, okay, here's my competing theory, I've managed to prove the opposite by my book, but also using the same faulty maths. and what's really frustrating in this whole thing is that it's already entered the public consciousness. So there are certain things that we just accept as true because we've learned from psychologists.
Those things.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah.
So everyone's heard of it, right?
Yeah.
We had an expert that came and lectured us and said that in all of her detailed, thorough research, Stockholm syndrome isn't really a thing. What happens is terrorists aren't always super evil baddies, right? They're actually people. And sometimes police are looking to end a siege quickly before too many press get involved. And so there's this thing where sometimes the police want to end it too quickly, and sometimes the hostages don't hate the terrorists, right? Like just normal observable effects. But however, you'll have these psychologists who are consultants arguing that Stockholm syndrome is a thing, therefore the FBI should storm the gates in the first 4 hours, otherwise the terrorists are going to hack the poor hostages' minds. Now, it makes sense from a police department who doesn't want bad press to smash the door in before the Fox News chopper shows up above, right? But if you actually look into the data and the study, and the meta-analyses, there's not good evidence that Stockholm syndrome is actually a thing. However, police forces act as if it was.
Yeah.
Huh.
Evan, I'm sure you have a better example.
I didn't know that one, so thank you for ruining another psychological concept for me.
All our heroes are falling. It's terrible.
One big one that comes to mind is the idea of willpower. So this idea that you have like a limited sort of ability to, or you have a limited, say, bandwidth for, mental exhaustion. So there are findings like, judges later in the day tend to give harsher sentences to, people found guilty or whatever. But I think there was a sort of, maybe if it was right after lunch, they were a little bit better because they had more glucose or whatever. But then it, crashed again, so that they had reduced willpower. And intuitively, for us, like, this kind of thing makes a lot of sense. You come home, from a long day at work, and you have limited capacity for listening to other people complain about their problems. And things like that. You're not going to want to, take out the trash or, whatever. Intuitively, that makes sense. There might still be a concept there, but, this was a huge field of study for a long time. And then there were these people started to question it a little bit, and then there were, probably still are, labs doing these sort of more massive experiments with, a huge sample size to see, if there really is something there, if we really do have that limited capacity for, I think it's usually emotional or mental, energy or whatever you want to call it. And I think by the end of it, it was like there might be something there, but it's like tiny. So that's one example, and of course people talk about willpower all the time, but also the replication stuff are really just, it speaks to a broader crisis in psychology that doesn't necessarily involve replication. It also involves some of these foundational studies that were really ethically flawed, and the results are not as clear as we are often taught in undergraduate psychology courses. So two examples are the
prisoner.
Yeah, I was going to say the Stanford
Yeah.
prison experiment. Phil Zimbardo.
I'm sure you've heard of it, Finn.
Yeah. The one where they had someone saying, "Give the guy an electric shock." No, give the prisoner a shock.
No,
Was it
that's the
one?
Milgram experiment.
Yeah, that's the other one I was going to say.
Okay, let's go into both. So the Zimbardo
What's the prisoner one? The first one.
prison experiment is when they assigned people, you're a prisoner, you're a guard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the guards abuse the prisoners, right?
Yeah.
Go for it, Evan. I've teed you up.
Yeah, there were a few issues with it. Like, I mean, beyond the ethical issues, there was also like this idea that, and I believe it was actually just a class. It was Zimbardo's class that he divided,
Which is a problem already.
Yeah.
Momentum, Chris, right?
yeah, there's the dual relationship there, but the there was this.
Obviously, they know what he's studying and
Right.
what his theory and philosophy is. Yeah.
Right, huge problems there, and then supposedly the classmates who were assigned to be prisoners, some of them were told that they could leave whenever they wanted, but none of them actually did. And I think actually it turns out they weren't told that they could stop it whenever they wanted. And then on top of
even their parents showed up and asked for some of them to be able to go home, and they told their parents, can't happen. So it was very bad.
It's pretty
right,
that's
really bad.
Dubious, isn't it? That's pretty bad.
Yeah, so that's another really popular one that
And it's similar to the McMartin thing. You can go home when I get the result I want from my study.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the
the
message
same
is coming
thing, yeah.
from on top.
Right.
What about the other, the Milgram? What was it? The shocking one.
the electric shocks. Yeah,
Did
so
they
had,
really shock someone?
No.
No.
They didn't, did
someone
they?
acting, pretending they were being shocked.
Because then when they got to like super high like voltages or whatever, and then the person just stopped like screaming or whatever, and they're like, "Oh." Was that?
I don't know. I think they just wanted to see if people would actually go to the highest level of shock.
So it was just an act of pretending, but what they were doing was seeing how high someone would go. Right? Like up there. And there was even a skull and crossbones in some versions of the experiment. Danger, high voltage. And according to the experiment, 70% of people go really high.
Yeah, and part of it was like these people would start doing it, and then they would turn to the person in the room with the white lab coat on and say, this seems really painful. I don't know if I should continue. And the investigator would say, please continue. And they would keep going. At least that was the idea that we were told. there was something that came out recently. Someone reviewed reviewed the experiment and some documentation.
And the transcriptions, right?
Transcriptions, yeah. There was more to the story. I don't remember exactly what it was. I think actually a lot of them really did stop after a certain number of shocks or whatever and refused to keep going. Chris, maybe you know more.
The replication failure of the Milgram experiment, I haven't had. My favourite, though, what I studied at the time 15 years ago, was that there's one example where it doesn't work, and the sample was Australian women. And the transcriptions for that, like, honestly, I get emotional. Like, I'm not afraid to admit I cried reading it. So they did this experiment with Australian women, and Australia's a unique sample through its own history and natural selection anyway. But yeah, Australian women who are independent and against authority to the point where when the experimenter was like, after like 10 votes, the Australian women would turn around and be like, yeah, fuck off, mate. Like, if you want to shock them, why don't you do it fucking own self and just get up and walk out? Like 90% are just like, yeah, no, I'm done. This is bullshit.
That's great. Yeah, actually, I just looked it up quickly, actually, and supposedly a lot of the people who, kept administering those shocks were pretty much convinced that it was fake already. So I think it wasn't very convincing. Maybe it was the skull and crossbones gave it away, but yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. But this is it, right? Like, so there's this compound effect of the professor who's selling books, who wants to make a bold theory, his students who want to pass the class and want to get on to the next level, maybe apply for funding to do further education. And then when you publish this exciting result, we've all read the Milgram because it's good. It's good news, right? It's good clickbait. It's a 40, 50-year-old study that we still know today. Yeah, you can see why this happens. It's not just you get paid if you come up with an exciting thing. It's more complex than that, but no one wants to study something for 4 years and then publish the results that say, everything I said for the last 5 years and have been teaching 2,000 people now might be bullshit. Sorry. That's a pretty hard admission to make.
Yeah, part of it I think is psychology is really hard as a science. Human behavior is so variable. You have to control for so much stuff, and by the time you do all that,
study a human mind.
Yeah, and by the time you control for everything that you need to control for, you might end up in a place where it's totally unlike the real world, so it has no external validity. So and
it's a lot easier to study psych students who get course credit if they do your study.
Right. That's another big problem is most participants in these studies are undergrads at universities. There's most of them are what we call weird, so
participant bias, right?
Yeah, westernized, educated, industrialized. I forgot what the R is. And I think the D is democratic or something like that. But it's just a very specific demographic, so we don't know, does this just apply to
studying social psychology? Is that it was like, here's what a Midwestern, like upper class, well-educated sample size found on this study in racism, and I was like, I just Googled the demographic, and I'm like, there's only white people. In that area. Why are we reading their study on racism? Who cares?
Yeah, we find a lot of these things don't apply cross-culturally. Other countries, other groups of people are very different in terms of whether these are findings at all when you test on them. So the R in weird actually stands for rich. So Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. That's the majority of psychology study participants.
But that's not the majority of like what psychology is, of who psychology is.
By definition, it's
a very small number of people. Yeah, and I should underscore, these scientific issues aren't just a problem of psychology. There's a lot of bad science in the medical field. So, supposed treatments for cancer that don't actually work. And then there's bad nutrition science. Yeah, it is a problem, I think, with science in general. Just the people's tendency to do bad science for whatever reason, convenience, ignorance, or profit.
Doesn't that
really
then
unfortunate.
in turn kind of lead to these kind of conspiracy theories and all of this kind of hyping of this, that, and the other? Because people don't really necessarily understand how to read the difference between a well-designed, solid study with a good sample size versus these.
So there is exactly this movement of anti-science, right? Don't trust the academics. Global warming's an obvious one, right? The assumption that, anyone that's in climate change science doesn't get paid for the file draw effect. And the sad thing is there is some truth to that criticism. Like, I'm not about to come up with my hot take that global warming's not a thing. I mean, you can look at the studies that debunk global warming, and they're often sponsored by oil companies. Right. Make your own assumptions from that. However, it is true that if you worked for, the Icelandic Institute of Climate Change, an institution I've just made up, you wouldn't publish. You'd still have a file draw effect, right? You wouldn't publish your failure to prove anything studies as often.
Yeah, there is some effort, I think, to change this sort of thing. So there's things like pre-registration where you indicate your hypothesis, how many participants you're going to recruit,
what methodology you're going to use,
exactly,
what maths you're going to use to find the p-value. Yeah,
exactly. They make you spell everything out so that you can't really play any games with it. And because the issue with sample size also is like you might decide how many to recruit based on you have the participant come in, they do the experiment, you run the numbers, and you're like, no, we need more. It's not significant yet. And then as soon as you hit that significance, which could just be a fluke, because again, 5% chance.
You just stop if you
stop
studied
there.
10
and
more,
there you go.
then you stop as soon as you hit it, right?
Yeah. So that kind of thing is changing because of pre-registration, more open science generally. There are these, I think they call them many labs, where this sort of network of psychology labs around the U.S., probably around the world too, are at the same time doing these experiments, trying to replicate a lot of the findings that have already been reported in the literature. Trying to see if there's really something there. Sometimes they do find that there's support for some of these things. They're able to replicate some of these findings, and there are journals who will publish null results. I think you might have to pre-register or something like that, but they'll basically say beforehand that they're going to publish your paper, whatever the results are.
Especially now it's digital, right? 30 years ago.
How much does it cost?
You had limited space, but we should be publishing no results because,
absolutely,
like I say, even as an undergrad, the pressure to have a positive result, I felt.
Doesn't that then also allow for, in the future, more epidemiological, what are they called? Epidemiological? When they do a big review of all the different studies. No?
Meta studies.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they can study all these null results as well. Maybe that's going to give us a better picture in the future, right? Given that it's
absolutely
so easy to electronically put them up.
Yeah, meta-analyses are the best. If you're trying to think is this a thing? And you Google it and you see different studies saying different things, look for a meta-analysis that will take all these studies and put them together and say,
here's the bigger picture kind of thing.
You say they're the best, but when I was studying, I always thought that was done by the nerds, right? There was the big thinkers who were like, I've got a bold new idea. And then there was the guys that were like, I'm going to crawl through 5,000 studies.
Don't you need those, though? Don't you need those?
Yes.
I agree.
I'm going to take us out of the academic because this has real-world applications. The theory behind this informs therapy. And one of the most interesting things I learned on my psychology course was a comparison of the effectiveness of different therapies, right? So leaning on different psychological therapies. As we alluded to earlier, there's the backing of Freud, and and it is a shadow that looms large. And although I do understand your fight against obvious pseudoscience, what I do worry about in the context of the replication study is the fact that there's a healthy body of evidence that suggests not many psychological therapies work better than placebos. So a really interesting finding is that there are still a lot of psychodynamic therapists who are following, we'll call it post-Freud, right? But it's still on the basis of Freudian theory, which has been mostly debunked by almost any study that's cared to review it. Thankfully, I probably don't want to fuck my mum and kill my dad. Phew. Whew. Sigh of relief. However, the average therapist you'll meet has been trained by an organisation that believes that at the heart of its foundation. Now, how do we, as I say, obviously the work you do is amazing, brilliant to attack the obvious outliers. But what do we do with the fact that we know that so many therapists are working under a system that, when tested, admittedly by a flawed testing system, as we've just acknowledged, fails to find proof that the therapy works?
Yeah, it's tough. So we, like you said, we focus on basically what is bad, what really doesn't work,
terrible.
Yeah, what really not only doesn't work but causes harm. Sure. And we think that this recovered memory therapy really falls squarely in that camp.
Outside of Grey Faction and the great work you do, you personally, how do we in this conversation handle the fact that a lot of therapists are working on debunked theories?
It's a good question. There is this huge disconnect between the science and the people actually engaging in a lot of the therapy. I don't know that we can even do anything about that. Even if we had good studies saying this works, this doesn't. I suspect, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me what the placebo was in the study or studies you were referring to, but I suspect the biggest factor in whether a therapist is helpful is just the fact that they're there and there's someone to listen to. It's a human connection. I'm sure the specific techniques make a difference, especially in terms of whether or not they cause harm. But there might not be much of a difference between a lot of them as long as you have someone there that's listening to you.
Yeah. No, you nailed it. Therein lies the rub, right? If the placebo is 2 weeks of treatment by a junior person who's just going through the motions of what does an approximation of this therapy look like, all things look bad. When the test is, let's look at a patient who's had 6 months of the treatment, everyone seems to recover, even though the actual methodology they're using can be debunked. You've hit the nail on the head. It's described as the dodo bird effect. Have you heard this?
No.
So in Alice in Wonderland, there's a race. Everyone's running around in a circle. No one knows who's coming first because they're running in a short circle. And the dodo declares everyone wins. And so in therapy, it's described as the dodo bird effect because everything works. Everything gets a prize, right? No.
Not necessarily everything for everyone, though, right? Something might work for someone, but this one better for that person.
Yes. So the thing is, and I think you said it succinctly, clearly. Evan beautifully illustrated it. Is that you have a dedicated therapist who spent years studying and years trying, not only because he's or she, sorry, is a person that wants to help someone, and then they have that experience and time and knowledge, and they learn and adjust. But you also have a patient who has decided to take the commitment to improve themselves, to fix something, to repair something. And in those cases, you do find mostly things work for the better, and people do improve. And so, like I say, that's the other side of the coin to the cynical, nothing's been proven to work better than anything else. It's like, well, okay, when you have a bunch of dedicated people trying to help people, not going down Pizzagate conspiracy theories, you have a lot of people getting the help they need. So it is complicated, but it is hard to prove with science. But like I say, the absence of evidence isn't the proof of the evidence of absence, right?
Yeah, I suspect it's similar with like personal trainers. People are probably better off going and seeing personal trainers rather than trying to hold themselves accountable to going to the gym regularly. If you have someone there that's encouraging you, maybe giving you a little bit of direction, that kind of pushes you ahead a little bit. You know that someone else is there helping you, I think, is probably the biggest factor. And the willingness on your part to go is huge.
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it? Yeah. And maybe the social obligation. It's like when you feel, well, I should do it because I've already booked the psychologist or the personal trainer, and you're like, well, I don't want to let them down, so let's just sort it out.
Also, if you're paying for it, there's the aspect of cognitive dissonance. So you're saying, well, I'm paying for it, so it must be helpful, and that might help it.
It must be working. Be helpful. It's really expensive.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, I don't underestimate the Benjamin Franklin effect. It's called. Have you heard of that, Evan?
No.
Oh, it's beautiful. Oh my god! So I recommend this if you're interested in psychology or sales. Benjamin Franklin said in his diary, if you want a rich, powerful person to do you a favor, the first thing you do is approach them and ask to borrow $100. You pay it back quickly, and then instantly they're friends with you because of cognitive dissonance, which might not have been exactly how we understood it, but it does work. So I think, like you say, with personal training, just the level of commitment to something is more likely to see you through the thing. Evan, wow, what an interesting conversation. I'm really glad we were recommended to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me on. I had a great time.
Yeah, thanks. It's been fascinating.
Is there anything you'd like to recommend people visit, check out, any resources to learn more about Grey Faction and the great work you're doing?
Sure. You can check out our website, greyfaction.org. We have a list of conspiracy therapists with sort of profiles on each of them, what they're up to. We have an official forum on Facebook called Grey Faction Official Forum that you can request to join. Every Saturday night we have what we call Satanic Panic Saturday, where we watch some classic clips from the archives of Satanic Panic hysteria. Check us out. We're on Twitter also at Grey Faction TST or TST Grey Faction. I can't remember. One of the two. So you can learn more about us there.
Great. We can put those links in, can't we, Chris?
Yeah, of course we will. If you have any cool outro music that we can put at the end of the podcast, studies show that only 10% of people actually listen.
And that study got debunked because it couldn't be replicated.
So I like to give it as a gift to those people who are... dedicated enough to listen to the end. So if you have any friends that want to promote any music, please share it with us.
Okay, I will. Yeah, I think Lucian Greaves, the spokesperson of TST, is in a band, so maybe something from them.
Is that the same
if
as
you
Kim's
could ask
band?
him, that would be awesome.
Is he in a band with Kim or not? It's different.
I don't think so.
I think it's
I
different.
could be wrong,
though.
but I think it's different. Yeah.
I think it's different.
Just,
yeah, that'd
just
be cool
a
if you get us
bunch
one
of
them.
creative,
Yeah.
awesome people. Oh my god, I love it.
Sound. Yeah.
Do you have an inspiring quote to take us to the outro? I know it's a big ask to throw at you. I'll let you Google it. That's fine. I had one from Elizabeth Loftus, which I'll give a go as a plan B until you come up with something better. Memory, like liberty, is a fragile thing.
Here's one by John Stuart Mill. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that.
When I looked into the mirror on acid, I actually saw myself. But I also saw him for the first time in a while. A part of me. And it is getting more and more in control. It is really hard to understand its nature. It's not a joke, and it's definitely not just an ego fabrication. It's something far more serious. It's just different. A part of me. And it is getting more and more in control. Felix's essence is incomprehensible. I don't understand it. It's making its own decisions. It's scary sometimes, but it feels good.